The Paradise Mystery by J.S. Fletcher. Chapter 1. Only the Guardian. American tourists, sure appreciators of all that is ancient and picturesque in England, invariably come to a halt, holding their breath in a sudden catch of wonder, as they pass through the half-ruinous gateway which admits to the close of Rochester. Nowhere else in England is there a fairer prospect of old-world peace. There before their eyes, set in the center of a great green sward, fringed by tall elms and giant beeches, rises the vast fabric of the 13th century cathedral, its high spire piercing the skies in which rooks are forever circling and calling. The time-worn stone, at a little distance, delicate as lacework, is transformed at different hours of the day into shifting shades of color, varying from gray to purple. The massiveness of the great nave and transepts contrast impressively with the gradual tapering of the spire, rising so high above turret and clerestory that it at last becomes a mere line against the ether. In morning as in afternoon, or in evening, here is a perpetual atmosphere of rest, and not around the great church alone, but in the quaint and ancient houses which fence in the close. Little less old than the mighty mass of stone on which their ivy-framed windows look, these houses make the casual observer feel that here, if anywhere in the world, life must needs run smoothly. Under those high gables, behind those mullioned windows, in the beautiful old gardens lying between the stone porches and the elm-shadowed lawn, nothing, one would think, could possibly exist but leisured and pleasant existence. Even the busy streets of the old city, outside the crumbling gateway, seem, for the moment, far off. In one of the oldest of these houses, half hidden behind trees and shrubs in a corner of the close, 3 people sat at breakfast one fine May morning. The room in which they sat was in keeping with the old house and its surroundings, a long, low-ceilinged room, with oak paneling around its walls and oak beams across its roof, a room of old furniture and old pictures and old books, its antique atmosphere relieved by great masses of flowers, set here and there in old china bowls. Through its wide windows, the casements of which were thrown wide open, there was an inviting prospect of a high-edged flower garden, and, seen in vistas through the trees and shrubberies, of patches of the west front of the cathedral, now sombre and gray in shadow. But on the garden and into this flower-scented room the sun was shining gaily through the trees, and making gleams of light on the silver and china on the table and on the faces of the 3 people who sat around it. Of these 3, 2 were young, and the third was one of those men whose age it is never easy to guess, a tall, clean-shaven, bright-eyed, alert-looking man, good-looking in a clever, professional sort of way, a man whom no one could have taken for anything but a member of one of the learned callings. In some lights he looked no more than 40. A strong light betrayed the fact that his dark hair had a streak of gray in it, and was showing a tendency to whiten about the temples. A strong, intellectually superior man, this scrupulously groomed and well-dressed, as befitted what he really was, a medical practitioner with an excellent connection amongst the exclusive society of a cathedral town. Around him hung an undeniable air of content and prosperity, as he turned over a pile of letters which stood by his plate, or glanced at the morning newspaper which lay at his elbow. It was easy to see that he had no cares beyond those of the day, and that they, so far as he knew then, were not likely to affect him greatly. Seeing him in these pleasant domestic circumstances, at the head of his table, with abundant evidences of comfort and refinement and modest luxury about him, anyone would have said, without hesitation, that Dr. Mark Ransford was undeniably one of the fortunate folk of this world. The second person of the 3 was a boy of apparently 17, a well-built, handsome lad of the senior schoolboy type, who was devoting himself in business-like fashion to 2 widely differing pursuits, one the consumption of eggs and bacon and dry toast, the other the study of a Latin textbook, which he had propped up in front of him against the old-fashioned silver cruet. His quick eyes wandered alternately between his book and his plate. Now and then he muttered a line or 2 to himself. His companions took no notice of these combinations of eating and learning. They knew from experience that it was his way to make up at breakfast time for the moments he had stolen from his studies the night before. It was not difficult to see that the third member of the party, a girl of 19 or 20, was the boy's sister. Each had a wealth of brown hair, inclining, in the girl's case, to a shade that had tints of gold in it. Each had gray eyes, in which there was a mixture of blue. Each had a bright, vivid color. Each was undeniably good-looking and eminently healthy. No one would have doubted that both had lived a good deal of an open-air existence. The boy was already muscular and sinewy. The girl looked as if she was well acquainted with the tennis racket and the golf stick. Nor would anyone have made the mistake of thinking that these two were blood relations of the man at the head of the table. Between them and him there was not the least resemblance of feature, of color, or of manner. While the boy learnt the last lines of his Latin, and the doctor turned over the newspaper, the girl read a letter, evidently from the large sprawling handwriting, the missive of some girlish correspondent. She was deep in it when, from one of the turrets of the cathedral, a bell began to ring. At that she glanced at her brother. "There's Martin, Dick," she said. "You'll have to hurry." Many a long year before that, in one of the bygone centuries, a worthy citizen of Rochester, Martin by name, had left a sum of money to the dean and chapter of the cathedral on condition that as long as ever the cathedral stood, they should cause to be rung a bell from its smaller bell tower for 3 minutes before 9 o'clock every morning, all the year round. What Martin's object had been no one knew. But this bell served to remind young gentlemen going to offices and boys going to school that the hour of their servitude was near, and Dick Bewery, without a word, bolted half his coffee, snatched up his book, grabbed at a cap which lay with more books on a chair close by, and vanished through the open window. The doctor laughed, laid aside his newspaper, and handed his cup across the table. "I don't think you need bother yourself about Dick's ever being late, Mary," he said. "You are not quite aware of the power of legs that are only 17 years old. Dick could get to any given point in just about 1/4 of the time that I could. For instance, moreover, he has a cunning knowledge of every shortcut in the city." Mary Bewery took the empty cup and began to refill it. "I don't like him to be late," she remarked. "It's the beginning of bad habits." "Oh, well," said Ransford indulgently, "he's pretty free from anything of that sort, you know. I haven't even suspected him of smoking yet." "That's because he thinks smoking would stop his growth and interfere with his cricket," answered Mary. "He would smoke if it weren't for that." "That's giving him high praise, then," said Ransford. "You couldn't give him higher. Know how to repress his inclinations. An excellent thing, and most unusual, I fancy. Most people don't." He took his refilled cup, rose from the table, and opened a box of cigarettes which stood on the mantelpiece. And the girl, instead of picking up her letter again, glanced at him a little doubtfully. "That reminds me of something I wanted to say to you," she said. "You're quite right about people not repressing their inclinations. I wish some people would." Ransford turned quickly from the hearth and gave her a sharp look, beneath which her color heightened. Her eyes shifted their gaze away to her letter, and she picked it up and began to fold it nervously. And at that Ransford tapped out a name, putting a quick suggestion of meaning inquiry into his voice. "Bryce?" he asked. The girl nodded her face, showing distinct annoyance and dislike. Before saying more, Ransford lighted a cigarette. "Been at it again?" he said at last. "Since last time?" "Twice," she answered. "I didn't like to tell you. I've hated to bother you about it. But what am I to do? I dislike him intensely. I can't tell why, but it's there, and nothing could ever alter the feeling. And though I told him before that it was useless, he mentioned it again, yesterday, at Mrs. Folliot's garden party." "Confound his impudence!" growled Ransford. "Oh, well, I'll have to settle with him myself. It's useless trifling with anything like that. I gave him a quiet hint before, and since he won't take it, all right." "But what shall you do?" she asked anxiously. "Not send him away?" "If he's any decency about him, he'll go, after what I say to him," answered Ransford. Don't you trouble yourself about it. I'm not at all keen about him. He's a clever enough fellow and a good assistant, but I don't like him personally. Never did. I don't want to think that anything that I say should lose him his situation, or whatever you call it, she remarked slowly. That would seem— No need to bother, interrupted Ransford. He'll get another in 2 minutes, so to speak. Anyway, we can't have this going on. The fellow must be an ass. When I was young— He stopped short at that, and turning away, looked out across the garden as if some recollection had suddenly struck him. When you were young, which is, of course, such an awfully long time since, said the girl, a little teasingly. What? Only that if a woman said no, unmistakably, once, a man took it as final, replied Ransford. At least, so I was always given to believe. Nowadays— You forget that Mr. Pemberton Bryce is what most people would call a very pushing young man, said Mary. If he doesn't get what he wants in this world, it won't be for not asking for it. But if you must speak to him, and I really think you must, will you tell him that he is not going to get me? Perhaps he'll take it finally from you, as my guardian. I don't know if parents and guardians count for much in these degenerate days, said Ransford. But I won't have him annoying you, and I suppose it has come to annoyance. It's very annoying to be asked 3 times by a man whom you've told flatly, once and for all, that you don't want him, at any time, ever, she answered. It's irritating. All right, said Ransford quietly. I'll speak to him. There's going to be no annoyance for you under this roof. The girl gave him a quick glance, and Ransford turned away from her and picked up his letters. Thank you, she said, but there's no need to tell me that, because I know it already. Now I wonder if you'll tell me something more. Ransford turned back with a sudden apprehension. Well, he asked brusquely, what? When are you going to tell me all about Dick and myself? She asked. You promised that you would, you know, some day. And a whole year's gone by since then, and Dick's 17. He won't be satisfied always, just to know no more than that our father and mother died when we were very little, and that you've been guardian, and all that you have been to us. Will he now? Ransford laid down his letters again, and thrusting his hands in his pockets, squared his shoulders against the mantelpiece. Don't you think you might wait until you're 21? He asked. Why? She said with a laugh. I'm just 20. Do you really think I shall be any wiser in 12 months? Of course I shan't. You don't know that, he replied. You may be a great deal wiser. But what has that got to do with it? She persisted. Is there any reason why I shouldn't be told everything? She was looking at him with a certain amount of demand, and Ransford, who had always known that some moment of this sort must inevitably come, felt that she was not going to be put off with ordinary excuses. He hesitated, and she went on speaking. You know, she continued almost pleadingly, we don't know anything at all. I never have known, and until lately Dick has been too young to care. Has he begun asking questions? Demanded Ransford hastily. Once or twice lately, yes, replied Mary. It's only natural. She laughed a little, a forced laugh. They say, she went on, that it doesn't matter nowadays, if you can't tell who your grandfather was. But just think, we don't know who our father was, except that his name was John Brewery. That doesn't convey much. You know more, said Ransford. I told you, always have told you, that he was an early friend of mine, a man of business, who, with your mother, died young, and I, as their friend, became guardian to you and Dick. Is there anything much more that I could tell? There's something I should very much like to know, personally, she answered, after a pause which lasted so long that Ransford began to feel uncomfortable under it. Don't be angry or hurt if I tell you plainly what it is. I'm quite sure it's never even occurred to Dick, but I'm 3 years ahead of him. It's this. Have we been dependent on you? Ransford's face flushed, and he turned deliberately to the window, and for a moment stood staring out on his garden and the glimpses of the cathedral. And just as deliberately as he had turned away, he turned back. "No," he said. "Since you ask me, I'll tell you that. You've both got money, due to you when you're of age. It's in my hands. Not a great lot, but sufficient to cover all your expenses, education, everything. When you're 21, I'll hand over yours. When Dick's 21, his. Perhaps I ought to have told you all that before, but I didn't think it necessary. I dare say I've a tendency to let things slide." "You've never let things slide about us," she replied quickly, with a sudden glance which made him turn away again. "And I only wanted to know because I'd got an idea that we were owing everything to you." "Not from me!" he exclaimed. "No, that would never be," she said. "But don't you understand? I wanted to know something. Thank you. I won't ask more now." "I've always meant to tell you a good deal," remarked Ransford after another pause. "You see, I can scarcely yet realize that you're both growing up. You were at school a year ago, and Dick is still very young. Are you more satisfied now?" he went on anxiously. "If not, I'm quite satisfied," she answered. "Perhaps some day you'll tell me more about our father and mother, but never mind even that now. You're sure you haven't minded my asking what I have asked?" Of course not, he said hastily. "I ought to have remembered. But we'll talk again. I must get into the surgery, and have a word with Bryce, too." "If you could only make him see reason and promise not to offend again," she said, "wouldn't that solve the difficulty?" Ransford shook his head and made no answer. He picked up his letters again and went out, and down a long, stone-walled passage which led to his surgery at the side of the house. He was alone there when he had shut the door, and he relieved his feelings with a deep groan. "Heaven help me if the lad ever insists on the real truth and on having proofs and facts given to him," he muttered. "I shouldn't mind telling her when she's a bit older, but he wouldn't understand as she would. Anyway, thank God I can keep up the pleasant fiction about the money without her ever knowing that I told her a deliberate lie just now. But what's in the future? Here's one man to be dismissed already, and there'll be others, and one of them will be the favored man. That man will have to be told. And so will she then. And, my God, she doesn't see and mustn't see that I'm madly in love with her myself. She's no idea of it, and she shan't have. I must continue to be only the guardian." He laughed a little cynically as he laid his letters down on his desk and proceeded to open them, in which occupation he was presently interrupted by the opening of the side door and the entrance of Mr. Pemberton Bryce.
The Paradise Mystery by J.S. Fletcher. Chapter 2. Making an Enemy. It was characteristic of Pemberton Bryce that he always walked into a room as if its occupant were asleep and he was afraid of waking him. He had a gentle step which was soft without being stealthy, and quiet movements which brought him suddenly to anybody's side before his presence was noticed. He was by Ransford's desk ere Ransford knew he was in the surgery, and Ransford's sudden realization of his presence roused a certain feeling of irritation in his mind, which he instantly endeavoured to suppress. It was no use getting cross with a man of whom you were about to rid yourself, he said to himself. And for the moment, after replying to his assistant's greeting, a greeting as quiet as his entrance, he went on reading his letters, and Bryce turned off to that part of the surgery in which the drugs were kept, and busied himself in making up some prescription. 10 minutes went by in silence. Then Ransford pushed his correspondence aside, laid a paper-weight on it, and twisting his chair round, looked at the man to whom he was going to say some unpleasant things. Within himself he was revolving a question. How would Bryce take it? He had never liked this assistant of his, although he had then had him in employment for nearly 2 years. There was something about Pemberton Bryce which he did not understand and could not fathom. He had come to him with excellent testimonials and good recommendations. He was well up to his work, successful with patients, thoroughly capable as a general practitioner, there was no fault to be found with him on any professional grounds. But to Ransford his personality was objectable. Why, he was not quite sure. Outwardly, Bryce was rather more than presentable, a tall, good-looking man of 28 or 30, whom some people, women especially, would call handsome. He was the sort of young man who knows the value of good clothes and a smart appearance, and his professional manner was all that could be desired. But Ransford could not help distinguishing between Bryce the doctor and Bryce the man, and Bryce the man he did not like. Outside the professional part of him, Bryce seemed to him to be undoubtedly deep, sly, cunning. He conveyed the impression of being one of those men whose ears are always on the stretch, who take everything in and give little out. There was a curious air of watchfulness and of secrecy about him in private matters, which was as repellent, to Ransford's thinking, as it was hard to explain. Anyway, in private affairs he did not like his assistant, and he liked him less than ever as he glanced at him on this particular occasion. "I want a word with you," he said curtly. "I'd better say it now." Bryce, who was slowly pouring some liquid from one bottle into another, looked quietly across the room and did not interrupt himself in his work. Ransford knew that he must have recognized a certain significance in the words just addressed to him, but he showed no outward sign of it, and the liquid went on trickling from one bottle to the other with the same uniform steadiness. "Yes?" said Bryce inquiringly. "One moment." He finished his task calmly, put the corks in the bottles, labelled one, restored the other to a shelf, and turned round. Not a man to be easily startled, not easily turned from a purpose, this, thought Ransford as he glanced at Bryce's eyes, which had a trick of fastening their gaze on people with an odd, disconcerting persistency. "I'm sorry to say what I must say," he began. "But you've brought it on yourself. I gave you a hint some time ago that your attentions were not welcome to Miss Bewery." Bryce made no immediate response. Instead, leaning almost carelessly and indifferently against the table at which he had been busy with drugs and bottles, he took a small file from his waistcoat pocket and began to polish his carefully cut nails. "Yes?" he said, after a pause. "Well?" "In spite of it," continued Ransford, "you've since addressed her again on the matter. Not merely once, but twice." Bryce put his file away, and, thrusting his hands in his pockets, crossed his feet as he leaned back against the table, his whole attitude suggesting, whether meaningly or not, that he was very much at his ease. "There's a great deal to be said on a point like this," he observed. "If a man wishes a certain young woman to become his wife, what right has any other man, or the young woman herself, for that matter, to say that he mustn't express his desires to her?" "None," said Ransford, "provided he only does it once, and takes the answer he gets as final." "I disagree with you entirely," retorted Bryce. "On the last particular, at any rate. A man who considers any word of a woman's as being final is a fool. What a woman thinks on Monday, she's almost dead certain not to think on Tuesday. The whole history of human relationship is on my side there. It's no opinion, it's a fact." Ransford stared at this frank remark, and Bryce went on, coolly and imperturbably, as if he had been discussing a medical problem. "A man who takes a woman's first answer as final," he continued, "is, I repeat, a fool. There are lots of reasons why a woman shouldn't know her own mind at the first time of asking. She may be too surprised. She mayn't be quite decided. She may say one thing when she really means another. That often happens. She isn't much better equipped at the second time of asking. And there are women, young ones, who aren't really certain of themselves at the third time. All that's common sense. "I'll tell you what it is," suddenly exclaimed Ransford, after remaining silent for a moment under this flow of philosophy. "I'm not going to discuss theories and ideas. I know one young woman, at any rate, who is certain of herself. Miss Bewery does not feel any inclination to you, now nor at any time to be. She's told you so 3 times, and you should take her answer and behave yourself accordingly." Bryce favoured his senior with a searching look. "How does Miss Bewery know what she mayn't be inclined to in the future?" he asked. "She may come to regard me with favour." "No, she won't," declared Ransford. "Better hear the truth and be done with it. She doesn't like you, and she doesn't want to either. Why can't you take your answer like a man?" "What's your conception of a man?" asked Bryce. "That, and a good one!" exclaimed Ransford. "May satisfy you, but not me," said Bryce. "Mine's different. My conception of a man is of a being who's got some perseverance. You can get anything in this world, anything, by pegging away for it." "You're not going to get my ward," suddenly said Ransford. "That's flat. She doesn't want you, and she's now said so 3 times, and I support her." "What have you against me?" asked Bryce calmly. "If, as you say, you support her in her resolution not to listen to my proposals, you must have something against me. What is it?" "That's a question you've no right to put," replied Ransford, "for it's utterly unnecessary. So I'm not going to answer it. I've nothing against you as regards your work. Nothing. I'm willing to give you an excellent testimonial." "Oh," remarked Bryce quietly. "That means you wish me to go away?" "I certainly think it would be best," said Ransford. "In that case," continued Bryce, more coolly than ever, "I shall certainly want to know what you have against me, or what Miss Bewery has against me. Why am I objected to as a suitor? You, at any rate, know who I am. You know that my father is of our own profession, and a man of reputation and standing, and that I myself came to you on high recommendation. Looked at from my standpoint, I'm a thoroughly eligible young man. And there's a point you forget. There's no mystery about me." Ransford turned sharply in his chair as he noticed the emphasis which Bryce put on his last word. "What do you mean?" he demanded. "What I've just said," replied Bryce. "There's no mystery attaching to me. Any questions about me can be answered. Now, you can't say that as regards your ward. That's a fact, Dr. Ransford." Ransford, in years gone by, had practised himself in the art of restraining his temper, naturally a somewhat quick one, and he made a strong effort in that direction now, recognizing that there was something behind his assistant's last remark, and that Bryce meant him to know it was there. "I'll repeat what I've just said," he answered. "What do you mean by that?" "I hear things," said Bryce. "People will talk. Even a doctor can't refuse to hear what gossiping and garrulous patients say. Since she came to you from school, a year ago, Wrychester people have been much interested in Miss Bewery, and in her brother too. And there are a good many residents of the Close, you know their nice, inquisitive ways, who want to know who the sister and brother really are, and what your relationship is to them." "Confound their impudence!" growled Ransford. "By all means," agreed Bryce. "And, for all I care, let them be confounded too. But if you imagine that the choice and select coteries of a cathedral town, consisting mainly of the relics of deceased deans, canons, prebendaries, and the like, and of maiden aunts, elderly spinsters, and tea-table haunting curates, are free from gossip, why, you're a singularly innocent person." "They'd better not begin gossiping about my affairs," said Ransford. "Otherwise—" "You can't stop them from gossiping about your affairs," interrupted Bryce cheerfully. "Of course they gossip about your affairs, have gossiped about them, will continue to gossip about them. It's human nature." "You've heard them?" asked Ransford, who was too vexed to keep back his curiosity. "You yourself?" "As you are aware, I am often asked out to tea," replied Bryce, "and to garden parties, and tennis parties, and choice and cosy functions patronized by curates and associated with crumpets. I have heard with these ears. I can even repeat the sort of thing I have heard. That dear, delightful Miss Bewery, what a charming girl! And that good-looking boy, her brother, quite a dear. Now, I wonder who they really are. Wards of Dr. Ransford, of course. Really, how very romantic. And just a little, unusual. Such a comparatively young man to have such a really charming girl as his ward. Can't be more than 45 himself, and she's 20. How very, very romantic. Really, one would think there ought to be a chaperone." "Damn!" said Ransford under his breath. "Just so," agreed Bryce. "But that's the sort of thing. Do you want more? I can supply an unlimited quantity in the piece, if you like. But it's all according to sample." "So, in addition to your other qualities," remarked Ransford, "you're a gossiper?" Bryce smiled slowly and shook his head. "No," he replied. "I'm a listener. A good one, too. But do you see my point? I say, there's no mystery about me. If Miss Bewery will honour me with her hand, she'll get a man whose antecedents will bear the strictest investigation." "Are you inferring that hers won't?" demanded Ransford. "I am not inferring anything," said Bryce. "I am speaking for myself, of myself. Pressing my own claim, if you like, on you, the guardian. You might do much worse than support my claims, Dr. Ransford." "Claims, man!" retorted Ransford. "You've got no claims. What are you talking about, claims?" "My pretensions, then," answered Bryce. "If there is a mystery, as Wrychester people say there is, about Miss Bewery, it would be safe with me. Whatever you may think, I'm a thoroughly dependable man, when it's in my own interest." "And when it isn't?" asked Ransford. "What are you, then, as you're so candid?" "I could be a very bad enemy," replied Bryce. There was a moment's silence, during which the two men looked attentively at each other. "I've told you the truth," said Ransford at last. "Miss Bewery flatly refuses to entertain any idea whatever of ever marrying you. That eventuality may never be mentioned to her again. Will you give me your word of honour to respect her wishes?" "No," answered Bryce. "I won't." "Why not?" asked Ransford, with a faint show of anger. A woman's wishes." "Because I may consider that I see signs of a changed mind in her," said Bryce. "That's why." "You'll never see any change of mind," declared Ransford. "That's certain. Is that your fixed determination?" "It is," answered Bryce. "I am not the sort of man who is easily repelled." "Then, in that case," said Ransford, "we had better part company." He rose from his desk and going over to a safe which stood in a corner, unlocked it and took some papers from an inside drawer. He consulted one of these and turned to Bryce. "You remember our agreement?" he continued. "Your engagement was to be determined by a 3 months' notice on either side, or, at my will, at any time by payment of 3 months' salary." "Quite right," agreed Bryce. "I remember, of course." "Then I'll give you a cheque for 3 months' salary. Now," said Ransford, and sat down again at his desk. "That will settle matters definitely, and, I hope, agreeably." Bryce made no reply. He remained leaning against the table, watching Ransford write the cheque. And when Ransford laid the cheque down at the edge of the desk, he made no movement towards it. "You must see," remarked Ransford, half apologetically, "that it's the only thing I can do. I can't have any man who's not welcome to her, to put it plainly, causing any annoyance to my ward. I repeat, Bryce, you must see it." "I have nothing to do with what you see," answered Bryce. "Your opinions are not mine, and mine aren't yours. You're really turning me away as if I were a dishonest foreman. Because in my opinion it would be a very excellent thing for her and for myself if Miss Bewery would consent to marry me. That's the plain truth." Ransford allowed himself to take a long and steady look at Bryce. The thing was done now, and his dismissed assistant seemed to be taking it quietly. And Ransford's curiosity was aroused. "I can't make you out," he exclaimed. "I don't know whether you're the most cynical young man I've ever met, or whether you're the most obtuse. Not the last, anyway," interrupted Bryce. "I assure you of that." "Can't you see for yourself, then, man, that the girl doesn't want you?" said Ransford. "Hang it, for everything you know to the contrary, she might have, other ideas." Bryce, who had been staring out of a side window for the last minute or two, suddenly laughed, and, lifting a hand, pointed into the garden. And Ransford turned, and saw Mary Bewery walking there with a tall lad, whom he recognized as one Sackville Bonham, stepson of Mr. Folliot, a wealthy resident of the Close. The two young people were laughing and chatting together with evident great friendliness. "Perhaps," remarked Bryce quietly, "her ideas run in that direction? In which case, Dr. Ransford, you'll have trouble. For Mrs. Folliot, mother of yonder callow youth, who's the apple of her eye, is one of the inquisitive ladies of whom I've just told you, and if her son unites himself with anybody, she'll want to know exactly who that anybody is. You'd far better have supported me as an aspirant. However, I suppose there's no more to say." "Nothing," answered Ransford, "except to say good day and good-bye to you. You needn't remain. I'll see to everything. And I'm going out now. I think you'd better not exchange any farewells with anyone." Bryce nodded silently, and Ransford, picking up his hat and gloves, left the surgery by the side door. A moment later, Bryce saw him crossing the Close. End of Chapter 2, Making an Enemy. The Paradise Mystery by J.S. Fletcher. Chapter 3, St. Wrytha's Stair. The summarily dismissed assistant, thus left alone, stood for a moment in evident deep thought before he moved towards Ransford's desk and picked up the cheque. He looked at it carefully, folded it neatly, and put it away in his pocket-book. After that, he proceeded to collect a few possessions of his own, instruments, books, from various drawers and shelves. He was placing these things in a small handbag when a gentle tap sounded on the door by which patients approached the surgery. "Come in," he called. There was no response, although the door was slightly ajar. Instead, the knock was repeated, and at that Bryce crossed the room and flung the door open. A man stood outside, an elderly, slight-figured, quiet-looking man, who looked at Bryce with a half-deprecating, half-nervous air, the air of a man who was shy in manner and evidently fearful of seeming to intrude. Bryce's quick, observant eyes took him in at a glance, noting a much worn and lined face, thin grey hair, and tired eyes. This was a man, he said to himself, who had seen trouble. Nevertheless, not a poor man, if his general appearance was anything to go by. He was well and even expensively dressed, in the style generally affected by well-to-do merchants and city men. His clothes were fashionably cut, his silk hat was new, his linen and boots irreproachable. A fine diamond pin gleamed in his carefully arranged cravat. Why, then, this unmistakably furtive and half-frightened manner, which seemed to be somewhat relieved at the sight of Bryce? "Is Dr. Ransford within?" asked the stranger. "I was told this is his house." "Dr. Ransford is out," replied Bryce. "Just gone out, not 5 minutes ago. This is his surgery. Can I be of use?" The man hesitated, looking beyond Bryce into the room. "No, thank you," he said at last. I don't want professional services. I just called to see Dr. Ransford. The fact is, I once knew someone of that name. It's no matter at present." Bryce stepped outside and pointed across the close. "Dr. Ransford," he said, "went over there. I rather fancy he's gone to the Deanery. He has a case there. If you went through Paradise, you'd very likely meet him coming back. The Deanery is the big house in the far corner yonder." The stranger followed Bryce's outstretched finger. "Paradise?" he said, wonderingly. "What's that?" Bryce pointed to a long stretch of grey wall which projected from the south wall of the cathedral into the close. "It's an enclosure between the south porch and the transept," he said. "Full of old tombs and trees, a sort of wilderness. Why called Paradise, I don't know. There's a short-cut across it to the Deanery and that part of the close, through that archway you see over there. If you go across, you're almost sure to meet Dr. Ransford." "I'm much obliged to you," said the stranger. "Thank you." He turned away in the direction which Bryce had indicated, and Bryce went back, only to go out again and call after him. "If you don't meet him, shall I say you'll call again?" he asked. "And what name?" The stranger shook his head. "It's immaterial," he answered. "I'll see him somewhere or later. Many thanks." He went on his way towards Paradise, and Bryce returned to the surgery and completed his preparations for departure. And in the course of things he more than once looked through the window into the garden and saw Mary Bewery still walking and talking with young Sackville Bonham. "No," he muttered to himself, "I won't trouble to exchange any farewells. Not because of Ransford's hint, but because there's no need. If Ransford thinks he's going to drive me out of Wrychester before I choose to go, he's badly mistaken. It'll be time enough to say farewell when I take my departure, and that won't be just yet. Now I wonder who that old chap was. Knew someone of Ransford's name once, did he? Probably Ransford himself, in which case he knows more of Ransford than anybody in Wrychester knows, for nobody in Wrychester knows anything beyond a few years back. No, Dr. Ransford, no farewells to anybody. A mere departure, till I turn up again." But Bryce was not to get away from the old house without something in the nature of a farewell. As he walked out of the surgery by the side entrance, Mary Bewery, who had just parted from young Bonham in the garden and was about to visit her dogs in the stable yard, came along. She and Bryce met, face to face. The girl flushed, not so much from embarrassment as from vexation. Bryce, cool as ever, showed no sign of any embarrassment. Instead, he laughed, tapping the handbag which he carried under one arm. "Summarily turned out, as if I had been stealing the spoons," he remarked. "I go, with my small belongings. This is my first reward for devotion." "I have nothing to say to you," answered Mary, sweeping by him with a highly displeased glance, "except that you have brought it on yourself." "A very feminine retort," observed Bryce. "But there is no malice in it. Your anger won't last more than, shall we say, a day?" "You may say what you like," she replied. "As I just said, I have nothing to say, now or at any time." "That remains to be proved," remarked Bryce. "The phrase is one of much elasticity. But for the present, I go." He walked out into the Close, and without as much as a backward look struck off across the sward in the direction in which 10 minutes before he had sent the strange man. He had rooms in a quiet lane on the farther side of the cathedral precinct, and his present intention was to go to them to leave his bag and make some further arrangements. He had no idea of leaving Wrychester. He knew of another doctor in the city who was badly in need of help. He would go to him, would tell him, if need be, why he had left Ransford. He had a multiplicity of schemes and ideas in his head, and he began to consider some of them as he stepped out of the Close into the ancient enclosure which all Wrychester folk knew by its time-honoured name of Paradise. This was really an outer court of the old cloisters. Its high walls, half ruinous, almost wholly covered with ivy, shut in an expanse of turf, literally furnished with yew and cypress, and studded with tombs and gravestones. In one corner rose a gigantic elm. In another a broken stairway of stone led to a doorway set high in the walls of the nave. Across the enclosure itself was a pathway which led towards the houses in the south-east corner of the Close. It was a curious, gloomy spot, little frequented save by people who went across it rather than follow the gravelled paths outside, and it was untenanted when Bryce stepped into it. But just as he walked through the archway he saw Ransford. Ransford was emerging hastily from a postern door in the west porch, so hastily that Bryce checked himself to look at him. And though they were 20 yards apart, Bryce saw that Ransford's face was very pale, almost to whiteness, and that he was unmistakably agitated. Instantly he connected that agitation with the man who had come to the surgery door. "They have met," mused Bryce, and stopped, staring after Ransford's retreating figure. "Now what is it in that man's mere presence that's upset Ransford? He looks like a man who's had a nasty, unexpected shock. A bad one." He remained standing in the archway, gazing after the retreating figure, until Ransford had disappeared within his own garden. Still wondering and speculating, but not about his own affairs, he turned across Paradise at last and made his way towards the farther corner. There was a little wicket gate there, set in the ivied wall. As Bryce opened it, a man in the working dress of a stonemason, whom he recognized as being one of the master mason's staff, came running out of the bushes. His face, too, was white, and his eyes were big with excitement. And recognizing Bryce, he halted, panting. "What is it, Varner?" asked Bryce calmly. "Something happened?" The man swept his hand across his forehead, as if he were dazed, and then jerked his thumb over his shoulder. "A man!" he gasped. "Foot of St. Wrytha's Stair there, Doctor. Dead! Or, if not dead, near it. I saw it!" Bryce seized Varner's arm and gave it a shake. "You saw what?" he demanded. "Saw him fall, or rather flung," panted Varner. "Somebody, couldn't see who, nor how, flung him right through yon doorway, up there. He fell right over the steps. Crash!" Bryce looked over the tops of the yews and cypresses at the doorway in the clerestory to which Varner pointed, a low, open archway gained by the half-ruinous stair. It was 40 feet at least from the ground. "You saw him thrown?" he exclaimed. "Thrown? Down there? Impossible, man!" "Tell you I saw it!" asserted Varner doggedly. "I was looking at one of those old tombs yonder. Somebody wants some repairs doing, and the jackdaws were making such a to-do up there by the roof I glanced up at them, and I saw this man thrown through that door, fairly flung through it. God, do you think I could mistake my own eyes?" "Did you see who flung him?" asked Bryce. "No, I saw a hand, just for 1 second, as it might be, by the edge of the doorway," answered Varner. "I was more for watching him. He sort of trotted for a second on the step outside the door, turned over and screamed, I can hear it now, and crashed down on the flags beneath." "How long since?" demanded Bryce. 5 or 6 minutes," said Varner. "I rushed to him. I've been doing what I could, but I saw it was no good, so I was running for help." Bryce pushed him towards the bushes by which they were standing. "Take me to him," he said. "Come on." Varner turned back, making a way through the cypresses. He led Bryce to the foot of the great wall of the nave. There, in the corner formed by the angle of nave and transept, on a broad pavement of flagstones, lay the body of a man crumpled up in a curiously twisted position. And with one glance, even before he reached it, Bryce knew what body it was, that of the man who had come, shyly and furtively, to Ransford's door. "Look!" exclaimed Varner, suddenly pointing. "He's stirring!" Bryce, whose gaze was fastened on the twisted figure, saw a slight movement which relaxed as suddenly as it had occurred. Then came stillness. "That's the end," he muttered. "The man's dead. I'll guarantee that before I put a hand on him. Dead enough," he went on, as he reached the body and dropped on one knee by it. "His neck's broken." The mason bent down and looked, half curiously, half fearfully, at the dead man. Then he glanced upward, at the open door high above them in the walls. "It's a fearful drop, that, sir," he said, "and he came down with such violence. You're sure it's over with him?" "He died just as we came up," answered Bryce. "That movement we saw was the last effort. Involuntary, of course. Look here, Warner, you'll have to get help. You'd better fetch some of the cathedral people, some of the vergers." "No," he broke off suddenly, as the low strains of an organ came from within the great building. "They are just beginning the morning service. Of course, it's 10 o'clock. Never mind them. Go straight to the police. Bring them back. I'll stay here." The mason turned off towards the gateway of the close, and while the strains of the organ grew louder, Bryce bent over the dead man, wondering what had really happened. Thrown from an open doorway in the clerestory over St. Wrytha's Stair? It seemed almost impossible. But a sudden thought struck him. Supposing two men, wishing to talk in privacy unobserved, had gone up into the clerestory of the cathedral, as they easily could, by more than one door, by more than one stair, and supposing they had quarrelled, and one of them had flung or pushed the other through the door above, what then? And on the heels of that thought hurried another. This man, now lying dead, had come to the surgery seeking Ransford, and had subsequently gone away, presumably in search of him, and Bryce himself had just seen Ransford, obviously agitated and pale of cheek, leaving the west porch. What did it all mean? What was the apparently obvious inference to be drawn? Here was the stranger dead, and Varner was ready to swear that he had seen him flung violently through the door 40 feet above. That was murder. Then who was the murderer? Bryce looked carefully and narrowly around him. Now that Varner had gone away, there was not a human being in sight, nor anywhere near, so far as he knew. On one side of him and the dead man rose the grey walls of nave and transept, on the other the cypresses and yews rising amongst the old tombs and monuments. Assuring himself that no one was near, no eye watching, he slipped his hand into the inner breast pocket of the dead man's smart morning coat. Such a man must carry papers. Papers would reveal something. And Bryce wanted to know anything that would give information and let him into whatever secret there might be between this unlucky stranger and Ransford. But the breast pocket was empty. There was no pocket-book there. There were no papers there. Nor were there any papers elsewhere in the other pockets which he hastily searched. There was not even a card with a name on it. But he found a purse, full of money, banknotes, gold, silver, and in one of its compartments a scrap of paper folded curiously, after the fashion of the cocked-hat missives of another age in which envelopes had not been invented. Bryce hurriedly unfolded this, and after one glance at its contents, made haste to secrete it in his own pocket. He had only just done this and put back the purse when he heard Varner's voice, and a second later the voice of Inspector Mitchington, a well-known police official. At that Bryce sprang to his feet, and when the mason and his companions emerged from the bushes, was standing looking thoughtfully at the dead man. He turned to Mitchington with a shake of the head. "Dead," he said in a hushed voice. "Died as we got to him. Broken, all to pieces, I should say. Neck and spine, certainly. I suppose Varner's told you what he saw?" Mitchington, a sharp-eyed, dark-complexioned man, quick of movement, nodded, and after one glance at the body, looked up at the open doorway high above them. "That the door?" he asked, turning to Varner. "And it was open?" "It's always open," answered Varner. "Leastways, it's been open like that all this spring, to my knowledge." "What is there behind it?" inquired Mitchington. "Sort of gallery that runs all round the nave," replied Warner. "Clerestory gallery, that's what it is. People can go up there and walk around. Lots of them do. Tourists, you know. There's 2 or 3 ways up to it. Staircases in the turrets." Mitchington turned to one of the 2 constables who had followed him. "Let Warner show you the way up there," he said. "Go quietly. Don't make any fuss. The morning service is just beginning. Say nothing to anybody. Just take a quiet look around, along that gallery, especially near the door there, and come back here." He looked down at the dead man again as the mason and the constable went away. "A stranger, I should think, Doctor. Tourist, most likely. But thrown down. That man Warner is positive. That looks like foul play." "Oh, there's no doubt of that," asserted Bryce. "You'll have to go into that pretty deeply. But the inside of the cathedral's like a rabbit warren, and whoever threw the man through that doorway no doubt knew how to slip away unobserved. Now, you'll have to remove the body to the mortuary, of course. But just let me fetch Dr. Ransford first. I'd like some other medical man than myself to see him before he's moved. I'll have him here in 5 minutes." He turned away through the bushes and, emerging upon the close, ran across the lawns in the direction of the house which he had left not 20 minutes before. He had but one idea as he ran. He wanted to see Ransford face to face with the dead man, wanted to watch him, to observe him, to see how he looked, how he behaved. Then he, Bryce, would know something. But he was to know something before that. He opened the door of the surgery suddenly, but with his usual quietness of touch, and on the threshold he paused. Ransford, the very picture of despair, stood just within, his face convulsed, beating one hand upon the other. End of Chapter 3, St. Wrytha's Stair.